Thank you for watching and learning with me up until this point. We have covered the first 12 years of Jesus' life, and we have a lot more to cover. Stick around for 7 minutes and watch this brief overview and summary of what we have learned so far.
Today we're going to look at the early life of Jesus, but maybe in a way you haven't thought about before. See, we're framing it as the meticulous, step-by-step process of an eternal king authenticating his identity right here on earth. It's really a story of divine credentials being laid out one by one.
So that gets us to the big question for this whole explainer. How does a king who exists outside of time prove who he is within time? It's not like he can just show up with a passport. No, it required a whole series of very specific, legally binding, and prophetically charged events.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll explore this whole process in 4 stages. First, we're going to start before creation itself, with the Word before time. Then we'll see how he was legally authenticated as a Messiah under law. After that, we'll witness the immediate conflict of recognition and rejection. And finally, we'll wrap up with the hidden years of growth.
You see, to really get the full picture, we can't start in a manger in Bethlehem. Nope, we have to rewind way back, past the beginning of time itself. The Apostle John, when he writes his gospel, anchors Jesus' identity not in human history, but in eternity.
The key here is a word John uses, the logos, or the word. Now, this was an absolutely brilliant choice of words because it connected with 2 totally different audiences at the same time. For his Greek audience, logos was the rational force, the logic that brought order to the whole universe. For his Jewish audience, it immediately brought to mind the creative, powerful word of God from the book of Genesis. So John is saying, hey, Jesus, he's the personal embodiment of all of God's logic and power. And John's choice of words is just incredibly precise. It all comes down to a crucial piece of Greek grammar. When he writes, "In the beginning was the Word," the verb he uses is en. That word means continuous, timeless existence. But then, when he talks about creation, he switches to the verb egeneto, which means it came into being at a specific point. The difference is crystal clear. The universe had a beginning, it was created, but the Word, Jesus, always was. He wasn't part of creation. He was the one doing the creating.
Okay, so let's move on to the next phase and see how this all builds. When the eternal Word finally enters human history, he doesn't just bypass the system. He submits to it completely. His birth and infancy were basically a masterclass in fulfilling every single legal and covenantal requirement, establishing his credentials under the law of Moses.
And each gospel writer gives us a slightly different angle on these credentials. You've got Matthew, who presents Jesus as the prophesied king, focusing on his legal lineage through Joseph. Luke, the physician, gives us the most detailed account of his youth, focusing on Mary and what happens in the temple. Mark, he just jumps right into Jesus' public ministry. He's all about the servant of action. And John, well, as we've already seen, he establishes Jesus' divine origin as the eternal Word.
Luke, the detail guy, lays out this really precise legal timeline for the king's first days. On day 8, he was circumcised and named, which officially entered him into the covenant God made with Abraham. Then, by day 40, right after Mary's purification period ended, he was presented in the temple. Every single step was in perfect lockstep with the demands of the law of Moses. And you've got to understand, these weren't just symbolic acts, they were legally binding. Circumcision marked him as a true son of the covenant. The redemption of the firstborn consecrated him to God, and the purification offering showed his family's total submission to the law. And here's the crucial point. The one who gave the law placed himself under the law to fulfill its every single demand for his people. Think about that for a second.
And in that offering, Luke includes this tiny detail that just speaks volumes. The law said you were supposed to bring a lamb, but it made a special exception for the poor. If you couldn't afford a lamb, you could bring a pair of turtle doves instead. This was the poor man's offering. It's just this powerful statement about the humility of this king, the Lord of the entire universe, born into a family that was by all accounts poor.
But even in this quiet moment of obedience in the temple, a prophetic voice just rings out. A man named Simeon holds the child and delivers this ominous prophecy. Right from his very first days, the Messiah is identified as a stumbling block, a figure so divisive that he would force everyone, and I mean everyone, to choose a side. He would cause some to fall in rejection and others to rise in faith.
And that brings us right to our third section,
The arrival of the king didn't just divide Israel. It immediately sparked a global conflict. It provoked both this intense worship from far away and, at the same time, murderous hostility right there at home. The reactions to his birth couldn't be more different, and they pretty much fall into three camps. First, you have the Magi, these Gentile astrologers who traveled for hundreds of miles, motivated by nothing but sincere worship. Then you've got King Herod, the guy in charge, motivated by pure political fear, who plots to destroy this potential rival. And then, and maybe this is the most chilling one, you have the religious experts, the scribes. They knew the prophecies, they knew exactly where the Messiah would be born, but they couldn't be bothered to walk 5 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to check it out. Just apathy.
Now, Herod's murderous rage forces the family to flee to Egypt. But this escape is way more than just a historical event. It's an amazing example of what theologians call recapitulation typology. Okay, fancy term. But what it means is that Jesus, as the perfect Son of God, essentially relives key moments from Israel's history to succeed where the nation of Israel, God's first son, had failed.
And Matthew just hammers this point home by quoting the prophet Hosea. Now, this verse originally referred to the nation of Israel coming out of slavery in the Exodus. By applying it to Jesus, Matthew is making a profound statement. He's saying Jesus is the true ideal Israel. His return from exile in Egypt is a mirror of the nation's exodus, and it establishes him as the perfect son who will finally accomplish what the nation never could.
All right, let's get to our final section, which covers the so-called hidden years. After all that conflict in Judea, the family settles down in a little town called Nazareth. And for nearly 2 decades, the king of the universe grows up in total obscurity, just preparing for his public mission. Okay, this is so cool. The choice of Nazareth has this fascinating prophetic layer to it. The town was so insignificant it's not even mentioned once in the Old Testament, yet Matthew sees a prophecy being fulfilled here. You see, the Hebrew word for branch, which was a famous title for the Messiah from the prophet Isaiah, is netzer, and the Hebrew name for the town of Nazareth was Natrat. Get it? The branch was from Branchtown, fulfilling all those prophecies that said the Messiah would be despised and come from a humble, overlooked place.
And during these hidden years, Jesus experienced genuine, real human development. This wasn't some divine being just pretending to be a boy. Luke, the physician, carefully records that he grew in 4 distinct ways: mentally in wisdom, physically in stature, spiritually in his relationship with his Father, and socially in his relationships with his community. He completely and fully embraced the human experience.
And the curtain on these hidden years is pulled back just once, when Jesus is 12. After he gets accidentally left behind in Jerusalem, his parents find him in the temple. And his response to their frantic search? Well, these are his first recorded words, and they are the ultimate credential. Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? With that one question, he clarifies his true identity, his ultimate allegiance, and the entire mission of his life. It kind of raises a final question for us, doesn't it? If the king's very first words define what his business is, what defines ours?